Okay, folks, over to you. They've had the majority of the time on the microphones. They don't have the majority of the wisdom. You folks do. We're going to crowdsource. We're going to access the hive mind. Sarah, over to you.
All right. Twitter's been pretty busy with lots of reflections and comments on all of the talks, so thank you for your feedback. A few of the comments have related to the first talk and reflections on how what you're advocating in terms of best practice brain management, as it were, and how that applies to us in our critical care environment. So, for instance, a lot of us work shift work, many of us work night shifts, frequent shifts in attention and task switching, which is required to care for multiple sick patients at the same time. We get interrupted a lot, even within the same minute. And our time frames are different. So for me, a long time frame is the end of my clinical week, short term is the end of my shift. And we also have a culture where we don't take breaks. So how do we apply what you're advocating for to our workplace?
Okay, quite a lot going on in that question. I think, again, if we come back not necessarily in terms of advice, but principles, I agree, and maybe I should have offered this caveat that when I talk about helping people be less reactive and more self-directed, then managers and leaders within certain organizations, that means one thing. For clinical care practitioners, it might mean something very different. But I think that precisely because certain conditions demand hyper-responsiveness, and with that responsiveness, clarity and high performance, right? Complete absorption so that you perform at your best. It is actually an even more important and relevant conversation with how you choose to use your attention when the conditions are different, which is why I asked questions such as, how many of you find yourself watching TV, but you're doing this with your smartphone? Because if you think about the costs of that in the long term, as it potentially changes the structure of your brain, right? I mean, it could be changing your anterior cingulate, which is the thing that might enable you to focus and deliver your very valuable role-specific tasks. So I think it's certainly not easy, but I think back to this point that reactiveness might be the wrong term, but I think this self-directedness, this understanding of our behaviors and their potential results or costs in the long term, that's what my piece about attention is. The other piece about irregular shift patterns, for example, is something that's very hard to manage. We know from plenty of research that shift work can have negative consequences. Having breaks also, it's easier said than done. So again, what's my point here? It's reinforcing the principle of energy being a limited resource. So if you have even more demanding roles than most, which I'm happy to acknowledge, then I think, therefore, how do you recover becomes an even more pertinent question. And why that might not be, well, I have a 17-minute break every 52 minutes. Maybe the time frame needs to shift, and you become someone that becomes ever better at prioritizing your physical, emotional, perhaps, recovery on your days off. Or you understand the inevitability that sustainable high performance comes in part through self-management. Some of that is your energy, some of that's your attention. And again, stressing the point that precisely because of your roles and your need to be absolutely on it and non-distracted, anything you can do outside of that particular room or those hours, I think becomes even more important.
Thank you. So maybe the boundary-pushing conferences like this place is a place to start with the 17-minute breaks every 52 minutes. Thank you. And another question sort of in a similar vein is directed at Sarah. So there was a lot of reflection on sort of the role of innovation in medicine, and in particular how innovation's often slow due to the culture that we have. There's lots of regulations, legal requirements, inertia, and a reliance on sort of consensus and evidence-based practice. How do we break from all of this to propel innovation within critical care, and what can we learn from you?
I don't think it's an either or. I think the systems and processes we've put in place, whether it's in medicine or in agriculture, are really important, and they're there for a reason. That said, to my point about mindset, there are little changes that we all can make, and there's little issues or opportunities that I imagine we all see on a day-to-day basis, and can think about what it would mean to break the rules in a cautious way or in a intentional way to start to make a change or to start to change people's minds. So I don't think it has to be fully shirk the system, but it can be little changes as we go. And agriculture is the same thing. We don't want to fully produce something that isn't going to be safe or that isn't going to be high quality or that we all are going to eat and have a big impact. So all of the same principles apply, and I don't think that's at all counter to innovation. It's how do you challenge the boundaries that are there for a reason and really break the rules when the boundaries aren't there for a reason.
Thank you. Then there are a few questions for Glenn and lots of reflections on his talk. In particular, if cognitive biases are in fact sort of, biases, as you say, why is it that clinicians' gut intention and the gut feel of experts, why is that so powerful in making, good diagnoses and decisions in stressful and unusual situations? And sort of along extending that, how can we most effectively train our prefrontal cortices to, step beside this?
So experienced clinicians use a lot of pattern recognition, and that's what they tend to term gut recognition. It's just pattern recognition. The gut response that I'm talking about is the gut response of you, and I've seen this many times. I've walked into an arrest situation and there have been 3 people standing against the wall, frozen like statues with their mouth open. That's the kind of overwhelming, blind panic, amygdala hijack that fear can produce. But fear is involved in all of even our subtle decisions every day. And the more that we can bring that to our conscious mind, rather than it be an unconscious influence, then the better that we can manage it. And there's a great technique that's being introduced in med schools around the world with an acronym called TWEED. After you make a decision, use TWEED. T stands for threat. Is my decision potentially going to kill this person? W, what else could it be? What if I'm wrong? E, what is the evidence for this decision? And D, disposition, how do I feel? Am I tired, angry, hungry? Has somebody just upset me? Is that influencing my decision making? And the studies that they've done on that particular acronym show that it improved medical students' decision making by about 30-40% in terms of objective assessment.
I'll throw out a question, if I may, to anyone on the panel. This conference is called Social Media and Critical Care. It's not called Nuanced Thought for a great deal of time and critical care. How are you all doing with the jealous spouse of social media at the same time as needing to be creative, nuanced, and deep thinking?
Can I make a comment?
You must make a comment, Simon, because there was an awful silence after that question.
So, is this on? Can anyone hear me? Yeah. Okay. So I was fascinated by this thing about the distraction and the brain and so on, which I think is what social media is, which is not the right thing to say at this conference. And people often say, God, it must be awful living in Australia. You're so far away. Well, it's wonderful living in Australia. And one of the reasons it's wonderful is because to go anywhere takes at least 15 hours, okay? So fly to Sydney to Dallas, and I get 15 hours with no email, no internet access, no social media, and I get a phenomenal amount of work done. I'm up the pointy end, so there's enough room for the computer. And I'll have another champagne, yes.
That's that whole write drunk, edit sober thing, isn't it?
So I had a question, okay, because you can come to a conference and I think, God, he's right, I really must try harder. But can we really put the mobile phone back in the box? How can you change this on a worldwide basis? Not just come and talk to us. How do we stop the kids of today and everybody who's out there, when you're on a train, nobody's talking to each other nowadays. Can we put it back in the box, or are we done for?
Okay, so a number of things. The back in the box is the term that might help me build on your point about the social media thing. I'm not against social media, and I'm certainly not against tech or our phones. What I'm pro is cultivating a relationship with these things that we would justify and even recommend to someone else, including our children. So social media on your terms can be valuable. Social media done is this kind of addictive loop that they're trying to reinforce, probably not so helpful. So what can we do strategically? Well, some of the things, do you know what? It's back to a point I think I made yesterday in the creativity. If we want to influence our children, we model the behavior we'd like to see in them. So if you are someone that checks your phone first thing before you get out of bed and you're still on it in the last 60 minutes like I asked yesterday, if you do find you start to track how many times you unlock your phone and it's in the hundreds, start to challenge that. Create a relationship with this that you assess, you challenge to a point where you're like, yeah, do you know what, for me, it's a number of times a day. And it could be social, it could be email, it could be all sorts of things, because none of these things are inherently bad. They all potentially have value. The reason they become negative and we want to put it back in the box is because we haven't figured out the relationship that we'd like with it. So it's back to us. The responsibility lies with us. And perhaps all of you. You now can share any insights you have, but not conceptual insights, behavioral insights. What are you now going to do differently? What are you going to change based on this?
And what a perfect way to end a perfect session. And now to introduce the future of Smack. Thank you very much for all your time.